clear minds. What if I told you that everything we've been taught about addiction is wrong? We hear it's a moral failing, a lack of willpower, or just a desire to party. What if it's not really about the drugs at all? The real story, backed by science, points to some powerful triggers that are much better at predicting who gets hooked. So, what are these hidden drivers? The answers might just change the way you see this disease forever. For decades, we've tackled addiction with shame and punishment, thinking it was a simple choice. But that approach has failed millions of people. The truth is a lot more complicated and honestly, a lot more human. Today, we're going to unpack that old way of thinking and build a new one, more compassionate, understanding, based on what the science actually says. By the end of the video, you'll know the three most overlooked triggers for addiction and why understanding them is so important for every single one of us. The first and maybe most important trigger isn't a drug or a drink. It's pain, specifically unresolved emotional pain that often starts in childhood. A lot of people who struggle with addiction aren't really chasing a high. They're desperately trying to escape a feeling. Using a substance often starts as a way to self-medicate, to quiet down deep emotional distress. Think about it this way. If you have a pounding headache, you have a painkiller. You're not doing it to feel amazing. You're trying to make the pain stop. For someone with a history of trauma, neglect, or abuse, emotional pain can feel just as real and just as unbearable. Study after study shows a staggering link between adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, and the risk of addiction later on. In fact, some studies show that up to 75% of people in treatment for addiction have a history of trauma. One found that having 4 or more of these traumatic childhood experiences made a person 10 times more likely to start injecting drugs. This isn't about making excuses. It's about finding an explanation. The addiction often isn't the real problem. It's an attempt to solve a problem, the power of overwhelming pain. The second trigger is something you're born with, something completely out of your control, your biology. We like to think we're all starting from the same place. When it comes to addiction risk, that's just not true. Genetics play a huge role. Scientists figure that our genes can be responsible for 40 to 60% of a person's risk of addiction. So, if you have a parent or a sibling with an addiction, your own risk is quite a bit higher. This genetic lottery can affect everything from how pleasure your brain feels when you use a substance to how your body processes it. But it's not just your genes, it's also about your age. The teenage brain is uniquely vulnerable. The part of your brain in charge of good decisions and impulse control, the prefrontal cortex, isn't fully built until your mid-20s. You can think of this teenage brain as a car with a super sensitive gas pedal. That's the reward system. But with really weak brakes, introducing addictive substances during that time can actually rewire the brain, making it so much harder to stop down the road. It explains why one person can experiment and just walk away, while someone else's brain chemistry and genetics puts them on a totally different track. The third trigger is one that our modern world often makes worse: a deep lack of social connection. Loneliness and isolation are incredibly powerful drivers of addiction. As humans, we are hardwired to connect with each other. When we can't find that bond with people, we'll connect with something else, a substance, a habit, anything to ease the pain of being alone. This was shown perfectly in the famous rat park experiments. When rats were kept alone in small empty cages, they would almost always choose water laced with drugs, drinking it until it killed them. But when other rats were put in the rat park, a big fun exclosure with toys, good food, and other rats to socialize with, they almost always ignore the drugged water. The takeaway from this is profound. The opposite of addiction isn't just being sober. For so many people, the opposite of addiction is connection. Living without a stable family, good friends, or a supportive community can send addiction risk skyrocketing. People turn to substances to fill a void that was meant to be filled by community, purpose, and love. So, why is it so important to refrain from addiction around these three triggers? Pain, biology, connection? Because it completely changes the conversation from blame to compassion. It shifts our focus from punishment to actual support. A person with an addiction isn't a bad person trying to become good. They're often a hurt person trying to heal. When we understand this, we see that shaming people into quitting will never work. The real solution is to help them heal their underlying trauma, to give them the medical and psychological support they need for their biology, and to build communities where everyone feels like they belong. This gives us a real, effective path forward, not just for individuals, but for all of us as a society. It's a kinder and ultimately a smarter approach. If this video shifted your perspective on addiction, please consider sharing it. Spreading this message helps break down the stigma that keeps so many people from getting the help that they deserve. And I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Which of these triggers stood out to you the most? Thanks for watching. Till next time.